No problem. So today's workshop is Accessibytes, an accessibility toolkit. And I'll first explain this A11y word. This is a numeronym, so a word that incorporates numbers to help explain things. And in this case, A11y, the 1 1 stands for there's 11 letters between the A at the beginning of the word and the Y at the end of the word. So it's kind of funny that a word like accessibility is so many letters long. And so this is a common shorthand that is used. And you can think of this similar to like K9, the letter K with the number 9, or Y2K or 24/7. So it's a similar concept to that. So why are we here? I'm hoping to help you learn how to identify some common accessibility barriers and give you some knowledge so that you can start building more inclusive digital content. There's also going to be some simple techniques here to make sure that your work is usable by more people. And who am I? Why do I know about this stuff? Why am I here? So I'm Meredith Mendola. I am the program manager for Center, the Center for Technological Responsibility, Reimagination, and Redesign. I have a plant science background. So I got my bachelor's in forest sciences and my master's in plant biology. I'm very fascinated by what goes on in the soil between plants and microbes. And so I went into research and studied a lot about ag technology, and this led to a career in digital innovation and product development as well. I have over 10 years experience working remotely, so I think that helps with some of my thoughts on how to be more inclusive digitally. I'm also an accessibility advocate, in large part because I do have multiple sclerosis or MS, but I also am neurodiverse, and I know lots of people who are neurodiverse or live with a disability of some kind. So I find that it's a great way for me to help other people in the community. I am a cane user and a wheelchair user, so behind me is a wheelchair. Um, and the fact that I need these assistive devices helps inform a lot of how I view the world and move about in the world. So I don't want to do too much like scholarly information here, but I did just want to bring up what is disability and that there is a medical model of what disability is. This is very focused on the individual, and this shows or claims that the individual is deficient. They are abnormal or they need to be fixed, repaired, or cured. While the social model of disability um, puts the emphasis on society being deficient because society does not provide a structural or systemic support to all people, regardless of their abilities. And there are lots of people who write about this, but Judy Heumann, she was a very vocal disability advocate, and she passed away a few years ago. But if you ever read anything by her, you will learn a lot, I promise. So, oh, sorry, to go back for a second, oftentimes we enact accessibility by combining both the medical model and social model together. So, for example, as an individual, I have difficulties walking, and so taking the stairs all the time is not the easiest for me. But for society, society is deficient in that there aren't elevators everywhere, right? So, in order to create an accessible environment, we take both of those things into consideration, like an individual's needs and what society can structurally provide. So, what is physical accessibility? This is our ability to access and navigate the physical and built environment by removing barriers. And the reason why it's physical and built is because there are many things that are inaccessible that we don't build in our natural environment as well. However, when we try to create an experience from those spaces, that's where we need to be removing barriers. So some examples for experiences could be going to a concert where there's flashing lights and really loud music. Um, some examples of products that can help uh, with accessibility include like left-handed scissors. Other left-handed things that you might see are some of the more like readily available concepts. And then I also wanted to share this photo from 1990. This is a famous event called the Capitol Crawl, where this young girl named Jennifer Keelan, she's 8 years old, and she led a whole bunch of disabled activists in a crawl up the steps of the Capitol building as they were waiting for the ADA to be passed and signed into law. So it shows you that uh, people really, really need this, and we're going to do the things that we need to do in order to fight for those that access. And I've included some links to some really good resources for physical accessibility information. So the Americans with Disability Act is a really good resource. I will caution you that it is not the gold standard of accessibility. In the disability community, it's considered kind of the bare minimum. And people largely only think of it in regards to wheelchair access to physical spaces. And the community, the disability community feels that there are a lot more things that are involved. However, this is a good starting point, and you can learn a lot about accessibility through them. The government also has an access board. This will can give you some more information about learning more about accessibility and if you want to be trained in those types of skills. So I want to share some personal examples of physical accessibility. So on the left here is a picture of my car outside, parked in a disabled parking spot, so a handicapped parking spot. Um, you can see the hatched area. This area is supposed to actually be empty so that you can get out of your car easily before you go into a building. Here they have tried to put a ramp here as a means of accessibility, but that ramp is actually in the way of this piece of space that you need. And I couldn't even get my car door open all the way, even though I am parked in an accessible parking spot. So this is an example of we tried to do something accessible, but we actually removed accessibility in a way. This is a local restaurant near me, and the only two entrances to it have a couple of steps to get up into. I am still capable of going up a couple of steps, but not everybody is. And so those are some just simple things to think about sometimes as, how can other people access this location besides me? Here are some more examples of physical accessibility. So this building on the left is actually my neurology department's office, so my neurologist's office. There is also a physical therapy practice in here, and it's kind of hard to tell from this photo, but there are only two handicap parking spots for this building, and there is only a single door entry. Um, a single door entry is very difficult to navigate if you use assistive devices, whether that's a cane, crutches, a wheelchair. So oftentimes we try to have double doors, and you'll see in more modern buildings that there are double doors. This building also does not have a door assist button where like you press the button and it opens the door for you. So this is an interesting situation because this is a medical facility where the majority of patients are people who are probably experiencing some kind of physical disability, and yet even this place could not provide as much accessibility as we had hoped. On the right is a sign showing a better example of physical accessibility. So this is a sign for an event that I participate in called the Brain Fair, and we try to have a quiet space at our Brain Fair so that are avoiding like sensory overload and making sure that if you need a break, if you're neurodiverse or if you're tired or anything and you just want to be in a different room where there isn't as much noise, you can use this quiet space. We also offer earplugs to attendees. So while they're inside, if things are loud, they can wear earplugs, and that helps soften the sensory overload. And we also put most of our signs in multiple languages. So we really are trying to reach the Hispanic community. And so most of our signage is also in Spanish as well. So this picture is here so I can tell you a story about a time where I experienced a lot of accessibility issues in one event. So I was invited to speak at a conference, and you can see that I am here on stage speaking at a conference. However, it was very daunting. So off to the left are very small wooden steps that don't have a railing, and they weren't very solid. And so it was difficult to go up those steps. Also, as I come, you can see up on the stage, I'm holding the microphone in my hand. There is no microphone stand. That was something that made it more difficult for me to speak at this conference because I had to hold a microphone. Also, at this event, we were having a party essentially in a restaurant and this was at the rooftop of this restaurant, and this building had no elevator. And no one thought about this at all when planning this party, and very much upset me because I went into this building and realized that, like, okay, I'm going to have to climb up a couple flights of stairs, and that's going to take me some time. I have to decide if it's worth it. I have to decide that I'm going to just stay up there. I'm not going to go anywhere else in this building for the rest of the evening. Um, all of those types of things. And it put all this burden on me to have to figure out how to handle that. It also really made me feel unwelcome and that I didn't belong in this place. And yet I was invited to be a speaker there. So I just want folks to consider that there are so many facets to accessibility, and especially when you are running an event, it is smart to ask your speakers what type of accessibility needs they may have, and also your attendees. So we'll move into digital accessibility now. So digital accessibility is the ability to access and navigate the digital environment by removing barriers and enabling participation. I also have some sources in the corner on this slide, including the WCAG guidelines, as well as Section 508. And in case you didn't know about the Computer Science Socially Responsible Computing group is putting together a handbook that also involves a lot of concepts and content around digital accessibility. So digital accessibility isn't just your cell phone. It is part of it, but it involves not just apps, but also PDFs, Word documents, graphs, web forums, any sort of digital or digitized resource. Apple is quite a leader in digital accessibility. They are one of the first teams that has made accessibility one of their main goals. So they bring this into their product development at the very beginning. They often will not release new features to the iPhone without going through like extensive accessibility testing. Other cell phone manufacturers do not necessarily do that. I'm not saying they don't have accessibility features, but it is an afterthought for them. So there are a lot of accessibility settings in Apple. Some things that are most common are like high contrast so that you can read things easier, using voice control in case you aren't able to use your hands to use your cell phone. Large text is very helpful if you have difficult with any vision problems. And also eye gaze control is one of the newer features they released in the last year, which can help you navigate your phone completely using your eye gaze. This leads me to another personal story. So when you have MS, heat causes really intense flares of symptoms, and this can become quite debilitating. So this was a time in the summer where it was very, very hot and the air conditioning in my car was broken. And I had to drive some friends to the train station in Providence, and I live on one of the islands, so that's quite a drive for me. Um, and because the air condition was broken, I was getting warmer and warmer and warmer, and I progressively lost the ability to use my arms and legs while I was driving. So I first started losing the ability to use my legs. I couldn't feel the gas or the brake pedal, and I had to turn on cruise control so that I could more easily, brake and accelerate and still be safe. Then it kind of started getting a little bit worse, and I noticed I started to not really be able to pick up my arms, and I was having trouble holding onto the steering wheel. And I managed to drive myself almost all the way home, basically using like my elbows and cruise control for the last few miles. And when I did get home, I could not get myself out of the car. So I couldn't pick up my arms, I couldn't open the car door, I couldn't move my legs. I was paralyzed essentially from the heat that day. And because I could not get out of the car, I had to use the voice control to have my phone call my husband and tell him what was going on and to have him come get me. And if I didn't have voice control on a cell phone, I honestly don't know what would have happened that day. Like, I could have ended up in the hospital. I could have ended up with extensively worse symptoms from that flare that could have led to more permanent disability. So I use this story as an example of how something that many of us take for granted actually can be something that really affects someone else's life and their quality of life. So, thinking more about digital accessibility and how you can improve the accessibility of things that you write and create. When we think about documents and written communication, it's really important to consider who's your audience and try to use plain language more than anything. For example, you're not going to write as if you were writing a journal article for publication when you're sending an email to someone or when you're um, potentially writing a short form report. This would definitely not be the same complexity and not the same vocabulary that you would necessarily use. You also want to avoid color coding to delineate concepts or authors. We see this a lot when people send emails back and forth. They'll start like, I replied in red, I replied in blue or something, but that's not necessarily helpful. And now we have a bunch of color coding, and that can be difficult for people to process as well. Another thing to consider is expanding acronyms the first time you use them. So when you say something like NMSS, you want to say that that's the National Multiple Sclerosis Society. You may want to say it multiple times, the full words, but you definitely want to do that the first time you use them in any document. And of course, make sure you're using inclusive language. This means trying to use words that are gender neutral, potentially culturally inclusive or culturally neutral. And that helps provide more understanding across multiple people and makes your documentation more accessible to everyone. So now I'm going to talk a little bit more about like improving accessibility of graphs and infographics. So this is a graph where on the left axis is how much antibodies essentially someone has to COVID in their blood. And on the x-axis is the people who are either treated with different disease modifying therapies. And I'm using this example because this was also a very personal thing to me. So as an MS patient, I take the drug all the way on the right called ocrelizumab. And we found that in folks that were being treated for MS, they weren't able to make COVID antibodies. So I hid for most of the pandemic. But the point of using this graph is to show you that these dots that are color coded are not helpful in delineating information. And if you were to put this graph into a black and white format, you would not be able to tell the difference between these dots. And so this is where using symbols could have been better, where we could have used a circle, a square, a triangle. It could have been a star, a circle, a square, things like that. But you want to avoid using color coding. And it's one of the easiest things that you can do to help make the things that you make more accessible. So I want to show a few more examples of kind of weird graphs and infographics and why they're not as accessible as they could be. So this is an infographic showing how your personal choices impact CO2 levels in the atmosphere and contribute to climate change. And it helps you see that all the different things that you potentially could do, like recycling or driving an electric car, things like that, can reduce your carbon footprint. But all the way over on the left, for some reason, I don't totally know why, the coloring is much lighter and you cannot see a good amount of the text. It is hard to read text that is on this side, this panel. And so while I guess they were trying to show the difference between low impact, moderate impact, and high impact, they could have done that by drawing a line instead and kept it all of the same color so that words could have been more easy to read. This is something you can ameliorate by using contrast and using contrast tools to see if things are still visible when you have more or less contrast. So this is one of my favorite bad data visualizations. Um, I think I took this screenshot like 5 years ago, and I just love using it because it's so confusing. I don't understand why we're using color coding in the first place. And the way that these numbers are ordered is bizarre. Like why wouldn't you put the record high at the top? If we think about temperatures in a scale from low to high, it would make more sense if we had those numbers up high. So there's just some things here where besides the color coding, this gray is awful hard to read, and this is not an interpretive graph at all, even if you don't have problems with seeing colors. Um, so it's important to consider how you display information for everyone. And as you do this, even just in ways thinking about perhaps a colorblind user, you would also be improving it for other people. So here is an example of a very good attempt at having an accessible guide, even though it uses color coding. So you'll see that there is a large blue spot here that's indicating this terminal, and the large red one indicates the terminal on the other side. Oh, I'm sorry, this is a graphic of the Atlanta International Airport. And though we do have some color coding for like retail shops, have this maroon, um, you do not have to rely on the color coding to know what's going on. So there is a pictogram here of retail. And so if you can read these and see that they're under the retail, you will know that they are retail. They also have sequential numbers. So everything in that category has these numbers. And this way, if you could not tell the difference between this maroon color and this gold color, it would not matter because there are still numbers that delineate them. So this is a good example of while they wanted to implement color coding to help a lot of people, they recognized that it wasn't the most accessible way to convey their information, and they found other methods of doing so. So now I want to give an example of image descriptions and talk about why these are important. So you may be someone who develops websites or you post on Instagram or LinkedIn, and you might get like a little prompt to add an image description or alternative text. And maybe you're like, ah, that's a waste of my time. I don't care. But it's very important, and it is for many reasons. So besides the fact that it provides access for individuals with vision impairments, It also reduces complexity of concepts. So if you have a table or a graph and you provide alternative text or an image description for it, you then are summarizing the information held in that image and providing another way for your readers or your users to understand that information. It also increases discoverability. So this information isn't just something that might get read by a screen reader to someone. It is also searchable information. It improves your search engine optimization. So as you're searching for a particular topic, your image description that has that keyword in it will also be part of the search engine optimization for that particular keyword. Another important point is that it maintains technical longevity. So, for an example, if you go to a website and an image is broken and you only see the little image broken icon, if you have alt text on it, you will see that text. And so, though you can't see the image, you now have more context for that image, even though you can't see it right now. So, as even though part of its technical life is not working at the moment, another part of it is still providing information. And that is extremely helpful. And when you write most of these image descriptions, you want to be concise, but not so concise that there is no understanding of what you've written from the picture. So a good practice is, do you understand the context of that image if you don't look at it when someone explains it to you or reads you the alternative text that you've written? And I'll show you an example in just a second, but I also wanted to share this link here where you can learn some more information about image descriptions. So here's a picture from a workshop, and I have two picture descriptions here, so image descriptions. So one of them is okay, I guess. It's people sitting at a table. It's true, but it doesn't really tell you anything about the people or what they're doing or what this context is. Here on the right side, our description is two women organizing a product backlog using physical index cards while sitting at a table in a workshop. So it told you that the image is focused on these two particular women and the activity that they are doing using physical index cards. But you also know by adding that they're in a workshop, it helps convey that there are more people around and it's not just two people sitting here. This may not be the best image description for this particular image, but you can see how it is a much better description than the first one. I've also included a link here to James Madison University. They have some really great resources on maintaining accessibility of learning materials. And so if you would like to learn more about that, I would suggest checking them. So all of the things we've talked about are make up parts of developing applications as well. But I want to talk about application development like a little bit more specifically because oftentimes, and I have seen this a lot, that it is something that is not taken into consideration from the beginning. So instead of waiting till the end when your product is almost done to start doing accessibility testing, this should be baked into your process from the beginning so that you have feedback from users that help you understand if what you are building is accessible or not. You should always question if like a cool feature that you think is really neat will be accessible to other people. So consider if you are blind or if you are deaf or nonverbal, or if you don't use a mouse and you use keyboard navigation, can you still use a feature that you want to create? Another tip is do not rely on automated accessibility solutions. There are lots of products out there that you can use to do like a quick automated assessment of your website. It'll give you some stuff. It is a great starting point. You'll probably learn something from it, but it is not comprehensive enough to know that you are truly making your product accessible for everyone. The best way to do that is to make sure that your acceptance testing is practiced with users who have lived experiences with disability. So instead of simulating what someone with a screen reader might experience so that you can figure out if it's accessible, you would actually find someone who uses a screen reader and have them test your product for you and give you their feedback. So that's just one example. There might be many other things, but with a screen reader, that's one example. You would definitely want to find those users who can truly tell you what it's like to use that. There are not a lot of organizations that are focused on this, and by that I mean they're not focused on true accessibility testing with people with lived experiences with disability. However, there is an organization in Minnesota called the We Company, and they employ their entire staff are people who live with disabilities and use different types of assistive technology, and that helps inform all of their product testing. Okay, so I'm glad that Aspen let us have this meeting as a hybrid meeting because hybrid meetings can actually be more inclusive than in-person meetings. And that can feel counterintuitive because I know a lot of people believe that if you're in person, so much more creativity can happen or there's so much more organic connection, but this is not necessarily true. And by having in-person meetings, you often are becoming exclusive. So hybrid meetings can be more inclusive because they provide access to something that you're doing, an experience like this, regardless of where you are located, or if you have transportation to get to that place, or if you have time to do that. Another thing that folks often do not think about is that it eliminates physical intimidation techniques. This is something that if you're a shorter person like me, you may notice more, but oftentimes in physical spaces, the tallest person or the loudest person or the biggest person or someone who gets into people's bubbles are able to intimidate others to make their opinions the ones that stand out the most. And when you hold a meeting like this instead, you remove that. Nobody knows how tall anybody is. Nobody can get into anybody's physical space. Nobody can intimidate anyone from a physical perspective. So it's a really nice way to provide more inclusion. Other things with hybrid meetings include like captions. They are not just for people who maybe have hearing impairments, but also people who speak a different language, maybe those who have cognitive processing difficulties or differences. I know I like using captions because I am ADHD and sometimes I can get distracted and it's helpful if I can just go back like 2 lines and be like, did I miss that word? It's super helpful and that can be something for more people to do as well. Cameras are really helpful because they allow interpretation of body language and facial expressions. Of course, this needs to be balanced with like comfort of people wanting to be on camera, considering people's privacy, as well as how large your event is and how many people are there. It makes no sense for everyone to turn on your cameras for probably more than 25 or 30 people in the same online call because you can't really see anyone anyways. Chat functions are great too because they can help shy people, introverted people, or even impulsive people contribute at their own pace. So if you take a little bit longer to process some information and then you want to write down your thoughts, you can do that when you're ready. If you're someone who maybe struggles with interrupting people, you can now put that through, you can channel that into the chat and put information there. Another thing that make hybrid meetings more inclusive is digital whiteboards. So digital whiteboards like Mural and FigJam and Miro, things like that, they can provide anonymization of discussions. And this is really important because This prevents what's called HIPPO, or the highest paid person in the office concept. So oftentimes, and this has a little bit to do with physical intimidation as well, whoever is the boss or the person at the top of a hierarchy will somewhat take over a discussion and somewhat potentially lead people into a direction of a decision making just because they are that person, just because they're the boss, they're the highest paid person in the office. And they may not be doing this on purpose at all. A lot of this is unintentional, but it does occur. And people will have biases towards agreeing with those particular people. So by anonymizing your discussions, you can have ways of putting thoughts on that you don't know who wrote them. You can vote for things and you don't know who voted. But another thing that's amazing about digital whiteboards, and so obvious though too, is that it's an enduring record of what you did. So oftentimes in in-person workshops, you'll take pictures of all your sticky notes all over the walls and tables and then try to like turn that into some data somehow that you can do something with. And that's very difficult. But a digital whiteboard, you have that now. It lives forever as a record of your discussions. It's an artifact. And you can take that information and create structured data out of it that you can then analyze and do more with. So it's a very nice tool that can be helpful in creating more inclusive hybrid meetings. I've also included a link. We have a guide for best practices for hybrid meetings that you can find on the center website if you're interested in learning more. So I'm hopeful that through everything I've talked about, you've learned that accessibility is very important in promoting inclusivity and equity. And from some of my personal stories, I hope you can understand that accessibility helps remove barriers for people who can't access things. It enables participation and makes us feel welcome and that we belong. It also provides support for things that we may need, whether that's helping us get from places to place, or things that can provide us with support from like healthcare or the government. And then it also can enact justice. And this is to be considered when we take into consideration that many people with disabilities have been treated very unfairly and poorly in the history of not just our country, but also the world. And so by making sure that people can participate in society if they want to, and they have access to education and they are not institutionalized and things like that, is a very important piece of accessibility and how that promotes inclusivity and equity. And then I'm going to leave you with this very important point. This is a journey. This is never going to be done. It's not easy, and it's okay to admit that you don't know something. You'll often start on your journey of thinking you're learning things about accessibility and trying to implement them. And oh, I was wrong, and now I have to go back and learn something new, and that's okay. It's impossible for us to be completely inclusive, no matter how hard we try, because we're always learning new things. But it's important to be willing to learn and understand that it's a journey and keep trying. So I thank everyone for coming today. And again, my name is Meredith Mendola. I am the program manager for Center. And if you'd like to reach out to me, you're welcome to email me at mendola@brown.edu.
Thank you so much, Meredith. This was really wonderful. I think it gives me a lot to think about in the work that I'm doing as well. Um, I was wondering, could you maybe share some like examples of how you're implementing these? Let me turn on my video. Could you give some examples of like how you're implementing these ideas and practices in the work that you're doing at Center, like how you've applied them?
Yeah, a great question. So I am very fortunate to be an advisor on two really cool things the center is doing. So one of them is the Socially Responsible Computing Handbook. That's a joint project with the SRC program in computer science. And I am advising both the product team there as well as the accessibility team. Actually, the accessibility team is writing about accessibility kind of more in general in the way that I shared with you. But it's been really interesting to work with these students who and help them see accessibility through different lenses. On the product side, also that's great because they are learning how to test products with accessibility in mind. And we are hoping to actually recruit users with lived experience with disabilities to help us truly test our product.
Wonderful, thank you. I think we have some questions in the chat as well.
Oh, cool. Let's see. Heather said, do I have any final tool recommendations? Ooh, so final? No. It's like there's no final. I am constantly learning more and more about accessibility, and not that I'm like a super duper expert, but I think it's really hard to feel that it's final. I think some tips to use are consider using your grayscale mode, especially if you use a Mac computer, because I know it's easy to find in the accessibility features. And you can test like, how does my graph or my image look when it's in grayscale? It's not perfect, but it does give you an idea of a place to start. Similarly with PowerPoint web pages, actually, what I think you should use for your most best resources would be these three, or actually these two, sorry, SRCH, but it would be Section 508 can provide a lot of information, and also the Bureau, I'll type this, of Internet Accessibility is a really great resource. And you'll find that all of these sources will also tell you that we kind of can't guarantee that you'll ever be fully accessible, but it's important to keep trying. So I hope you can find some more information using those as well. Also, depending on what programs you use, like PowerPoint, for example, has an accessibility filter. Again, that's automated, so it's not perfect, but you can learn from that as it tells you that this picture doesn't have an image description. Oh, okay. So then you'll go in and do that, and you'll realize that you should be putting in image descriptions. And as you start doing them, some of your earlier image descriptions might be a lot worse than your later ones. But the point is that you are attempting to put those image descriptions there. Oh, another question Heather had is, how can we move forward to assist folks who have already created an entire application without accessibility? It's really hard. It depends on the organization that you're working with or in. So if you work for a corporation, sometimes they have accessibility teams or they are thinking about creating an accessibility team. You may be able to go to them and say that you would like that to be part of the process going forward. You might be able to offer some volunteer time to help with some accessibility testing. Um, it is it's basically the importance here is to explain why accessibility is important, and that by addressing it earlier in the process, you will actually remove so much work that you have done, because you could spend a lot of time building something only to find out that it's not accessible at all and you have to start all over again. And if you had known that from the beginning, just by asking a few more questions or having a few more people look at it, you could remove the need to re-engineer something at some point. Um, are there any other questions? All right. Well, I appreciate all of you that came to learn a little bit more about accessibility. And it's something I really love talking about. So you will not bug me if you want to email me and talk about it or learn more about it or want me to send you even more resources. I can totally do that. So feel free to reach out. And thank you, Aspen, for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This video will go on YouTube if anyone wants it later.